Welcome to the podcast, Melody and Friends, where I will be taking a virtual tour around the world and interviewing all kinds of wonderful people. And today, we have a wonderful special guest here today, Sarah, who works with women all over the world, talking about abuse, not only just talking about abuse, but working with women who have been in toxic relationships, abuse, really helping them heal, but specifically with women of faith. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Melody. I actually muted myself there for a second because I live right by train tracks, and we got so lucky to get the train horn as they're going by.
I love that. Let's make it authentic and raw and real as possible.
It is. Yeah, it is very much so. We are not pretentious here.
Well, lovely before we dive in, I got to meet you a couple weeks ago when we were in a training together. And, if I'm being honest, I loved a lot of the insight and the wisdom that you were bringing to the table during this certification. So I did a little Facebook stalking and I found you and I was like, oh, how did I not know about Sarah? So here you are.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. It was a fantastic training. I enjoyed that. And I really appreciated your insights too. So I love connecting afterwards. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Well, for those people that don't know anything about Sarah McDugal, why don't you tell us a little bit just about you and get our listeners acquainted with you before we dive into our topic today.
Sure. So I am an author, speaker, and abuse recovery coach, and I'm the founder of Wilderness to Wild, and we just call it Wild. So Wild is an organization where we provide practical tools for abuse recovery, for post-trauma growth and wellness, and also, we work with those who are in crisis and who are seeking to get safety plans and to get out. So we kind of have a broad spectrum there. But some of the things that make us unique, because there are many advocacy organizations, some of the things that make us unique is that we focus specifically on working with women who have been wounded in these toxic, dangerous relationships inside the faith community. We work with helping women understand the systems and the tools of the mindset of control so that they can feel much more empowered to discern in healthier ways in the future. We work primarily with trauma mamas. So our niche is generally the woman that already has kids who is either discovering that she has been living in abuse or has just gotten out and is now looking for ways to heal, ways to parent her children well, to break those cycles of the past so that they can live in freedom and safety. And also we have a very disproportionately high ratio of those who are neurodivergent, who are parenting autistic children, who are parenting ADHD children. Now, we know that trauma symptoms can often mirror neurodivergent diagnoses. So when you are neurodivergent and you have trauma, it's this double whammy. And very often we find that the women in our audience are also discovering that they are neurodivergent themselves, typically in the process of getting their kids diagnosed. So it's kind of a unique niche. Women of faith, women who've experienced abuse and either have gotten out or are trying to escape, women who already have children, and kind of a sub niche is that neurodivergent aspect. Because all of those layers tend to to complicate, they pile on,
right,
to make it a very unique set of needs. And it needs unique support structures. So we provide online courses. We provide individual coaching. We provide a ton of free resources. We have over 300 videos on the YouTube channel. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that kind of thing. And we also have workshops, daily post-trauma habit coaching, very much a holistic approach. And we're working on some incredible new stuff specifically for those trauma mamas that I can't talk about yet, but I'm really excited. So if you want to know about that incredible new stuff, it's like groundbreaking stuff that there's nothing out there quite like it yet. And so I'm super excited about it. Definitely get on the email list for updates or start following on social if you want to be informed when those things come out. So,
of course, we all want to be.
Well, I would, but I'm biased. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's amazing that you do this work. And it's not easy work. So can you give me a little bit of a history? Like, how did you, we don't wake up one day and go, oh, I want to walk with abused women, or, primarily I walk with betrayed women. It's hard. It's a calling, it's an assignment. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this field, this niche.
Well, like all of us, I mean, like you just said, nobody answers questions in first grade saying, oh, I want to work with domestic violence victims. That's what I want to do. Pick me. I want to live down in the trenches of the worst of the pain and the evil, and live in the twilight zone of the faith community where people are losing their faith because people have misrepresented God to them. And so nobody dreams of this kind of career from childhood.
Yeah.
I was a pastor's wife for 13 years and a homeschool mom. I worked from home and did not realize for many years, I knew things were very, very off and very, very difficult. But like so many women, I had read all the books that are toxic and damaging and bestsellers and promoted everywhere. And I had done the seminars and the counseling and all of the things. And all of the things said, suck it up, don't complain, pray more, be more sexually available, make sure dinner's on time, make sure the kids' toys are picked up, make sure you manage the environment to avoid anyone else flying off the handle, make sure that you do all the things and lower your expectations. And it felt wrong, but I didn't know that was abuse. I didn't know it was spiritual abuse on the part of the people providing those materials. And I didn't know I was living in abuse. That became clear over time, but it took over a decade. And then it took much longer for me to come to peace with realizing that I truly had done every possible thing I could do to never look back with regret or wonder or be kicking myself for not having done enough. And so going through that and starting life over with little children, very little ones, being homeless for 4 months at the beginning of that journey, and trying to figure out how to work and provide and protect and parent and do all the things alone and without support, like I had planned on having as a parent, while also having my dignity and sense of, how do we put it, sense of value and identity stripped away. Because when you're the clergy spouse, you have a public platform and you live in a glass bubble in the first place. And so when those things become public knowledge and you're no longer filling that role, it's not just the loss of the home that you thought you were building, but it is also a loss of identity because your ministry role was wrapped up in the things you were doing in ministry. And being that for people. So when that is also stripped away, it's a double whammy. And anyway, moving on from that, the things that I learned over the years, I began realizing shortly after that God was calling me to support other women. There were women who would reach out to me that I had never met, kind of asking for a friend kind of approach, and I had worked as a clergy spouse internationally with other clergy spouses and developing network and support for them. And that was taken away from me because I was no longer a clergy spouse. So you don't get to work with the clergy spouses anymore. Mm-hmm. And when I began pulling out of survival mode, I realized that that I wasn't just me. There were masses of women in very similar, if not identical situations. And I've always been a justice warrior. I was a missionary kid, and I grew up that what we do is fight for people. Mm-hmm. We stand up for the oppressed. That's what we do as followers of Jesus. And I'm also on the spectrum, and I am raising 2 children on the spectrum. And my founding partner at Wild is on the spectrum. And individuals on the spectrum often tend to have this really powerful justice gene. We call them very grand emotions, things about justice and oppression and unfairness. And these supersede daily frustrations in a big way. Mm-hmm. And so as I began moving further down this road, just in response to people who began asking me questions, I was not looking to enter this. In fact, I went into it kicking and screaming, like, I don't want to be the girl who talks about how bad porn is. Like, I want to make happy videos of missionaries. I want to write fun books about, I don't know, leadership. And I want to tell funny stories about the things my kids say. And I do not want this. Because when you start this kind of work, and people ask you what you do at a dinner party, there's no faster way to drop a lead blanket on the room than to answer honestly. The thing is, I'm kind of big on answering things honestly, so you can imagine how that went. Oh. And so, in the years since then, I didn't know early on that my kids were on the spectrum. They got diagnosed, and I was like, well, that's funny. Everything that qualified them for a diagnosis is stuff they got from me. And, in those layers of revelation and understanding, I find that we are drawn to people who need to hear what our story has to offer. And as we begin sharing our story, and as we begin speaking out, everyone's story follows a slightly different path, and everyone's story has its unique elements. And your story will reach people. My story never will, because it will reach people who are going through it and feeling things the way you did. And my story will reach people who have things and elements and aspects that are similar to my journey. And so I think that the lesson out of that is that each of our voices is powerfully needed.
That's so good. Talk a little bit about for a woman who might be experiencing some things in her relationship. Mm-hmm. She can't put her finger on it. She feels a sense of confusion. I know we throw around terms like gaslighting and deflection and blame shifting and all that. Like, how would you if you were to give a definition of the word abuse, like, talk a little bit about what that looks like? Because it is that word that's thrown out there. But I think for a woman who is trying to better understand her situation, like, what would it look like? What are some of the behaviors that she might be experiencing from her partner or spouse or whatever?
Right. So there are a couple of ways to approach this. One is just the direct answer to your question. Like, okay, boom, 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 boom. Here are some practical examples of things. Yeah. But the challenge with that is that those practical examples may not fit your story. And then you feel like, oh, well, I'm confused. I'm foggy, I'm fatigued, I'm dealing with health issues that are completely unexplainable. My children are scared, I'm living in fear, but my story doesn't fit those 5 examples, so it must not be abuse. And I try to avoid that. So I want to kind of pull back and talk about a couple of things. One is the patterns of abuse, and one is the feelings that result from abuse. So we'll get to the feelings and the fear part in just a minute. But when we are looking at defining abuse, very often we think, oh, well, what are abusive behaviors? Let's just say if you throw someone into a wall, that's an abusive behavior. If you violently rape someone, we're probably all going to agree that that's abusive behavior. Right. If you lose your temper, though, and yell, is that abusive behavior? I mean, it can be. But is there anyone who listens to this and can honestly say, I have never lost my temper. I have never lost it on my kids. I have never had a terrible day and then treated someone in a way I was ashamed of later? No. So does that make all of us equally abusers? Also, no. What we have to look at is not an individual, discrete, one-time event. Right. And say, oh, that was abuse. That makes you an abuser. And let me finish before anybody jumps on it, because a one-time event can absolutely be abusive. The thing is, when we try to define abusive behaviors by single instances, we are missing the big picture. We're plucking leaves off the trees instead of looking at the whole forest. Abuse is a system, a pattern of behaviors. When there is an abusive system in place, we see the same 8 things happening every time. Whether that is an abusive workplace with a toxic boss, or an abusive social circle with a mean girl queen bee that runs everything and everyone else does whatever she wants, or whether that is an abusive sibling dynamic where there is a pecking order and a hierarchy and it's painful, whether that is an abusive church environment where there is a toxic poison air being preached in the name of God, whether it is an abusive marriage. There are 8 things. And when we see these 8 things present systemically in a pattern, we can know we are working with an abusive system, which means this is how we can tell the difference between the exhausted mom of, triplets, who just loses her mind one day during the bedtime witching hour and feels absolutely horrified and like a failure as a mother and walks away from that situation, crying herself to sleep that night and wakes up determined to never, ever lose it like that again. So this pattern, these 8 things that I will explain, helps us to be able to differentiate between when an abusive person is telling us it's all our fault and you have a great tender conscience, and so you begin to believe that it is all your fault. Because that right there is part of the pattern of abuse. So let's look at, there are 4 tools, and this is actually a rubric that was created, and there's an entire course on it, which if you're interested, I can give you a link to that course, but is created by Psalm 82 Initiative and the team there. But it's fantastic, and they've given me permission to share it. So the 4 tools of abuse are, first, my brain just completely went blank because my daughter just popped up like 3 text messages. First is isolation. Isolation is the mentality that you need to look to me alone for your information, for your social fulfillment, for your spiritual understanding. It's you and me against the world, baby. Nobody else understands you like I do. Or it could be the other way around. Nobody else can calm me down in one of my moods like you can. I can't live without you. You can't leave me. I would never survive. All of those things are isolation. It can also include your friends really aren't good influences on you because they see through him, or I wish you wouldn't talk to your mom so much. I really just want you to focus on me. All of these kind of things are manipulation. In a church environment, it can be talking about how evil all the other believers are. Everyone who doesn't believe just like us, they're all going to hell. We are the elite. We are the chosen ones, etc., etc. The second one is deflection. So we have isolation and then deflection. And you can basically imagine deflection is like the old kids thing, where kids have that little rhyme. What is it? I'm the rubber, you're the glue. It bounces off me and back onto you. So the whole idea that all the bad stuff, all the consequences, it all slides off of me and onto you or someone else. If it turned out badly, I didn't show up for work that day. It was the team. That was so-and-so's idea. Why are you always arguing with me? Why is this always going, wrong? Blaming others. Another word is blame shifting. But that deflection is refusing to take responsibility for your part of whatever happened. And that doesn't mean that you need to take responsibility for other people's situations or actions, just yours, because the only person you can control is yourself. Third is the opposite. It's the same concept as deflection, but it works in reverse, and that is manipulation. In deflection, all the bad stuff slides off of me and onto anyone or anything else. With manipulation, all the good stuff comes to me, baby. So the credit, the glory, the public image, all of that is mine and not yours. And that mentality is something that we often see in abusive parenting relationships. It's all about making the parents look good at church instead of just addressing, son, I don't want you to grow up with this kind of character. I love you too much to let you grow up this way. You know what? If you're going to act out, yeah, that's embarrassing, but I can deal with that. I'm a big person. So it's not about you embarrassing me. It's about me wanting you to be a healthy kid who grows up into a healthy, functioning adult, which is a very different approach to parenting than, I can't believe you embarrassed the family when you did such and such. You may be addressing the same behavior, but the motivation, one is manipulation because you are making me look bad. And the other is, I love you and I want you to overcome this because I care. Fourth, so we have isolation, deflection, manipulation, and fourth is intimidation. When someone is living in an atmosphere of abuse, there is always some element of intimidation. Do it a certain way or there will be a price to pay. Now, we often think of intimidation as something that's like big and in your face, like, you're going to come at me kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be physical and aggressive. It can also just be if you don't have the kid's toys picked up before he gets home, he'll be silent for 3 days and won't look at you or touch you. So you scurry around because you don't want the consequence of the silent treatment. That's intimidation. There'll be hell to pay on some unpleasant level. And it's not your conscience making you scurry around, it's fear. So those are the first 4 tools. Next, the other half of these 8 are 4 elements of the abusive system. The first one, these are the relational elements. So this is actually factor number 5, we'll call it, out of 8. And that is entitlement. He gets to do things you're not allowed to do. For example, let's say he is constantly violently jealous of you. So he tells you that, that in itself is a huge red flag, but he tells you that he wants you to delete the names of the contacts of guys out of your phone. But he's not deleting all the contacts of girls out of his phone. So he's entitled to tell you what to do, but he's not submitting himself to the same standard. So there's an imbalance of power, and the imbalance of power, there are 2 parts to this. There's an imbalance of power, and the imbalance of power is being used to control and exploit. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to go communist on redistributing the balance of power to everyone, because there's no way that a parent and a newborn can have the same balance of power. There's no way that we can say successfully that the way to fix this is for everyone to have equal power or for no one to have power at all. It doesn't work that way. What works is looking at it from a biblical point of view, that all power that comes from God that I employ is defined by being used to strengthen, protect, and uplift those around me, to give them more freedom to live an independent life, to live according to their conscience, to give them less fear. If I am using my power, and I tell this to my kids in sibling rivalry, which our house is not immune to like every other house. So the oldest one, okay, your sister just screamed because you were pointing a Nerf gun in her direction. No, you didn't pull the trigger, but yes, you've pulled the trigger before, and she was afraid you were going to do it again. So let me ask you, is your behavior making her feel more safe or more fearful? If your behavior is increasing the other person's fear, you are not using your power for good. Period. So if you are in a relationship where someone else is using their influence, not to make you more fearless and unafraid, but to make you more fearful and timid, that is an abusive relationship. And it doesn't matter which concrete example I might use, because it's the underlying issue, not whether or not it matches one specific example. So we have an entitlement. That entitlement is double standards. He gets access to do things you don't get access to do. He gets to tell you to do things, but he doesn't hold himself to the same standard. It's his right. Often in the faith community, he's been taught that it is his right, divinely ordained by God, to control you. And that is abusive. That is not the heart of God. If God was going to control us, he would have just done so instead of sacrificing his son to come and die for us to have the freedom to choose. 2, entitlement. So that's number 5. Number 6, I guess. Coercion. And that is requiring you or forcing you to do what they want. When entitlement and coercion, the second one is control. Coercion is the third one. When entitlement and control intersect, they create coercion. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I have the right to take power over you, which gives me the freedom to control you, which means I can force you. And the fourth or last is compliance. Every abusive system has victims that choose to comply, either because they've been conditioned to believe that's their only choice, or because even though they may see that it's not okay, that's the only way they feel safe to survive. We've seen this play out in some big headlines just recently. The Duggar case is people talk about, like, why would Anna Duggar not just leave? Because in order to stay alive and feed her children, she feels that she has no option but to comply.
Right.
So compliance provides the oil that greases the wheels of the abusive system. It is when a victim removes compliance that you begin to see how dangerous the abusive system truly is. So you can have a toxic, grotesquely abusive system, and it will hum along quite smoothly as long as everyone plays their part, as long as there is compliance from those who are under control. If there is no longer compliance, it's fruit basket upset. All the wheels start grinding against each other, and it becomes jerky and unmanageable. And that is truly why in domestic violence, sometimes the intersection of betrayal trauma and domestic violence, when we have a controlling, entitled partner, and then the victim chooses to leave, that's why that is the most dangerous time for her, because she has just removed compliance. She's taken back her personhood. And that turns the abusive system inside out. So we have isolation, deflection, manipulation, intimidation, entitlement, control, coercion, and compliance. Do you go along so that you feel less afraid? Now let's talk about the fear side. And for this, I just want to go straight to scripture. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and a clear mind." When we are living in that confusing relationship, and this is looping back to your original question, when I'm living in confusion, in fog, I'm not sure if it's abuse. I'm not sure that maybe he's never hit me. Maybe I've never overtly been sexually assaulted or raped, but there is coercion, there is entitlement, there is control, there is manipulation, deflection, intimidation, isolation. I've lost relationships. I feel confused. I'm constantly doubting myself, and I'm living in fear. Jesus says, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. 1 John 5:18. 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear. If you are living in fear and fog, if you feel powerless, if you do not have clear thinking and you are afraid, this is an abusive relationship. And that really allows every person, male or female, whether it's a social circle, a faith community, or a marriage, or your family of origin, those tools allow us to identify the patterns of abuse rather than trying to rely on defining that one instance. Were they really sorry? Maybe they meant it when they said they would never do it again. How long do I have to wait on pins and needles to find out if they will do it again? Because the abusive system has revealed itself.
Wow, that was so rich, Sarah. And I want to expound a little bit more on this, because I know you walk with women here. I walk with women here. It takes so much to get to a place, like you said, where compliance is not working anymore. You know, it's hurting them. And naturally, as a woman of faith, we want to go to that next place. Okay, let's say it's a partner, that's experiencing abuse. Okay, this person's not listening to me. Compliance is not working for me anymore. My next option, which is not easy for a woman to do, she says, I've got to go to my church. Like, I've got to get some help. I've got to get some safety. I've got to get some support. So again, the primary relationship is not safe. Most women of faith, that next step would be, I've got to run to my church to get help. And now the church is either calling her out. Wait, okay, he's got this problem. Where's your sin? all the things. Let's talk about what that looks like, because not every woman experiences this. A lot of women do. And we know that many of the clergy, the church leaders, they're just not educated. So we can grace them somewhat in that they don't have education, but there are some things like safety is safety and safety is safety, and truth is truth is truth. So let's go there for a few minutes and talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Sure. So in that, quite often, our church leaders have been educated in the same school of entitlement, control, and coercion that their buddies, the abusers, have been educated in. And unfortunately, the vast majority of wildly popular best-selling marriage and relationship material in the Christian publishing world for the last 50 years has all been toxic. It has promoted the idea that anyone who stands up against abuse is deceived, that any wife who wants to seek safety is betraying not just her husband and her vows, but her God. That anyone who leaves is going to permanently wreck your children, that it is better to suffer for the cause of God's glory, even if your husband kills you or is raping you, than to leave and seek safety. And these are lies. When we look at the book of Isaiah, when we look at the book of Joel, when we look at the heart of Christ to those who were abused in the New Testament, when we look at Paul's writings over and over again saying that those who are abusive and divisive and angry and given to substance abuse and given to greed and given to harmful speech, that these are not believers and that you should not have anything to do with them, but we exempt marriage from that. So if he paid for the ring on your finger, you are his property, you are less of a person. And so you don't have to obey all of the divine injunctions to have nothing to do with a contentious, evil, abusive person because you're married to them. But if we look at the fruit of the Spirit, and we look at the fact that the fruit of the Spirit is not gender limited to women only. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control are not female traits of the Spirit. They are traits of the Spirit for men and women alike, which means godly biblical manhood, if we want to use that term, which is quite fraught in many circles. But godly masculinity is loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind, good, gentle, faithful, and self-controlled. And that's just the minimum baseline. Acting outside of that and then using God's name to sanctify abusive behavior as a husband, as a father, is truly breaking the third commandment, to not take the name of the Lord in vain, to not take his name on me and then use that as a cloak to justify evil doing. So when we begin to look at it this way, we realize that many churches, many belief systems, and I work with women that range from Amish to Catholic, evangelical to independent fundamentalist, mainstream Protestant to congregational, smaller denominations. So this broad cross-section of women from a variety of faith backgrounds, but they all love Jesus and they want to do what's right. They tend to have a very tender conscience and to be hyper loyal and to have these super traits of empathy and honesty and goodness. And but all of these denominations tend quite often to have made idolatry out of staying married. And when someone seeks to escape evil, poisonous behavior that is happening in a marriage, all of these denominations tend to blame the person fleeing for safety instead of the person perpetrating evil. And When I read passages where God talks about his heart for the oppressed, about our mandate to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly, to bind up the brokenhearted, to free those from oppression, to break the chains that bind slaves, I think we've got that upside down. We need to be holding accountable those who are perpetrating harm and setting free those who are fleeing for safety, emotional, physical, spiritual, sexual, psychological safety. That being said, there is a wildfire movement that is increasing the opportunities for church leaders to be educated on this topic. Many, many church leaders are not yet educated on this topic. And those who have a conscience are very often looking to change and to become safety oriented. If that is not your church, you are not alone. The majority, I would say 80% plus of the women I work with have actually found their best support systems from the local domestic violence shelter, from the local family justice center, from other structures outside of their community. And there's so many reasons for that I can't explain in just one sitting. But if your church is not willing to stand up for safety for the vulnerable, it is okay, painful, but okay for you to say, these are shepherds who are using the heat to fulfill their meal contract with the wolves. They are hirelings. They are not protecting the lambs. And so I'm going to shake the dust off of my shoes and I'm going to move to somewhere that their priorities are right. I'm going to take myself and my kids to a place where people are concerned about our safety and our protection, because God is concerned about your safety and your protection.
I want to expound on that a little bit. I think that's so paramount what you just said. And I'm going to use an example. So a couple years ago, my son went to Belize, a number of years ago, 2013, 2014, and came back, and within like 2 to 3 weeks, lost 25 pounds. Okay. Clearly he had a first grade teacher, years and years and years before, who had gone to another country, came back with a parasite, all that. And I just remembered that conversation, and all the symptoms that he was having was very similar to what she was having. So I say that to say, we went to this doctor. He didn't really, we went to stomach doctor, gastro, whatever. He pulls out the CDC. I mean, long story short, 2 to 3 years later, we're still trying to figure all this out. But the mama gut in me was like, he's got a parasite. I know that I know that I know. So we went to doctor, and then we went to heart, and then all these different places, trying to tell us what it was. And I knew, that was not the case. And so the reason why I bring that story in is, you as a woman may be experiencing all these behaviors, all these 8 things that you just talked about, Sarah, and you get all the courage, you muster up all the courage to go to your church and to say, this is what's happening in my home. And they deflect, or they, minimize, or whatever. And I want to validate the work that it takes, pushing through the shame of, well, maybe it is my fault, or maybe I am crazy, or all the things. And then you go to your church all to kind of be shut down, discarded, dismissed, just like I had to go to multiple doctors until we really go find safety. And you mentioned some of these places, Sarah. Go to whomever, continue to go. There will be somebody out there that will hear that the sirens will be going off. Wait, she's not safe. We've got to get to her safety. And your partner may be saying, you're crazy. You're just not listening to your church members, or you're not submitting to your church authority, whatever that looks like. Go find safety. There is safety out there. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. But don't be discouraged, because you know that you know that you know that you know what is going on.
Right.
And so I want to put that plug in there, because I do think many women, they go that, their partner is making them feel crazy. They finally get the courage to go to their church, and now their church makes them feel crazy, and they just stop and they stay in it.
Well, that's why, two things. That's why instead of answering with a concrete list of like, well, it could be this, or it could look like this, or it could look like this. That's why I have those 8 things, because if you see those same principles, even a few of them happening in your church, if they're deflecting, isolating, manipulating, no, you should not go get counseling outside. No, you can't talk about this. It might make the church look bad. No, you shouldn't do this. Well, you know what? Maybe it all really is your fault, and you just weren't sexy enough, or, you gained 20 pounds after you had the last child. So it's probably your fault. All of these things, if you see those same elements of the abusive system from your church leadership, that tells you this is not a safe community.
That's right.
And if you speak up and take away compliance and all hell breaks loose, that tells you that you were a wheel in a cog, a compliant wheel in a cog of an abusive church system. So there are times, yes, that some of those responses can be out of pure lack of ignorance instead of malice. Right. And we do, like you said earlier, we do have to give some grace for that. There are times, but if you come back and you say, actually, I've been reading these books, and here's something from Lindy Bancroft. Here's something from Diane Langberg. Here's something from Jay Stringer. Here's all of these different people. And I would like it if you would be willing to read this book or these 5. And because I know I'm not the only person who might be experiencing this in our community. And as a leader, would you be willing to learn more? Would you be willing to sign up for Wild Safer Churches seminar to help educate yourself? And if they're like, you know what, lady, you are out of line. Sister, you need to pipe down. You need to know your place. Then you have done your part, because now they've shown themselves not to be innocently unaware, but maliciously toxic, because they refuse to learn.
Yeah.
Even Peter in the New Testament, in the apostolic church, the spiritual leaders, the powers that be, said, stop talking about this Jesus. Stop preaching. Stop trying to educate people. And what did Peter say? Actually, sorry, I got to obey God, not you guys. So the apostles stood up against their spiritual head, their spiritual leaders, their rabbis and the Pharisees and the executive body of spiritual government in their time, when that government did not agree with Christ. It's okay for us to do it too. Otherwise, we're placing idolatry on the role of spiritual leadership instead of worshiping Jesus. And that's really scary sometimes. It can feel terrifying to step out and take that leap.
Right.
But there's freedom and safety and a sound mind on the other side, living without fear.
Yeah.
And there's still Jesus on the other side too. It's not a life without Jesus that is without fear. It's a life with Jesus without fear.
That's so good. So let's talk a little bit practically. So let's say she goes to her church and that doesn't work well for her. Like practically for that woman who might be like, so what do I do now? What would some recommendations be for her in those moments?
So if you've already gone to your church and it didn't go well, then, and you're realizing that you need to seek support. First of all, if you are in physical danger or sexual danger of any kind, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And that's 1-800-733-722. I have to look it up. And the last, SAFE is the last one. Or just the hotline.org online. And look it up, call them, ask to speak to an advocate, ask for them to help connect you with resources in your area. If you are not in immediate physical danger, then I would still call them and ask about resources in your area. Many areas struggle with having enough resources, but there are also lots of areas that have domestic violence shelters, that have free counseling for those who can prove that they've been living in abuse, that, and their kids sometimes, that have a rape crisis center if you're being sexually violated in your marriage, that have family justice centers that can connect you with a ton of local resources. I found out something like 5 years after I went through my situation that in my county, there was one of the best, most robust domestic violence structures in the United States. I had no idea. Wow. And I had been the wife of one of the leading clergy in town in one of the larger churches in town. I had no clue. So I just buckled down and tried to figure it out on my own with the help of a few friends and parents, the people that I knew were safe and supportive. But if I had known, or if it had even occurred to me to just make one phone call, there would have been a vast amount of supports and resources and services that I could have been helped by. So I definitely recommend that as a first call. In addition to that, there are a number of organizations that provide faith-based peer support. You can get involved in clarity coaching, abuse recovery coaching, betrayal trauma recovery coaching. I know those are things that you do, Melody. Those are things that we do at Wild. We have thousands of women split into niched support peer groups where they are safe, confidential spaces that we have actively moderated. And those are for betrayal trauma. Those are for trauma mamas and parenting. Those are for those who have suffered child sexual abuse and are now dealing with it in adulthood. There's like a completely private, secret, confidential one for women who need extreme safety because they're trying to get out of really crazy situations. We're working on app material so you can have something on your phone to access. There are so many things, and that's just my organization. I know of a dozen other similar types of things that each meet slightly different niches. And we have resource bundles where you can go and look at the betrayal trauma. And then we have just tons of free links to like all kinds of things that's not our work, because we want you to have what works for you, every person. So if you've gone to your church and it didn't go well, the next step is your local services and online peer support and safe community, because you need to be able to connect with people who understand, even if they're not in your local neighborhood. You haven't gone to your church yet? I would recommend starting with your local services. Get those plugged in so you have an advocate, you have someone from the shelter or the Family Justice Center or whatever. Connect with online people, and then you've got some support network in place, and then go talk to your church. And that way, if it doesn't go great with your church, you're not left flailing entirely alone.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, let's talk about WILD. Literally, it stands for, something. So why don't you talk a little bit about WILD? Because one of the things that I love about, walking with women and in this space is I know I don't have all the tools in place for every knit, and so it's really important for us to lock arms. I think about that song, Break Every Chain. There's an army rising up. And I just really believe that if we're going to help women, heal and recover and step into the next space of their life, then I want to point people to WILD and all the other recovery organizations out there. So let's talk specifically about WILD and what y'all offer. I mean, I know you talked a little bit about that, but a little more broadly.
A little more. Okay. Well, first of all, to answer your early question here, WILD is an acronym, and it does stand for the 4 pillars of healing that are the process of post-trauma recovery. Mm-hmm. So we have a whole rubric, the 4 stages of healing, the 4 mindset shifts that take place, one at each stage, the ways that you heal, and the questions that you are wrestling with in each of those stages of healing. So we go through those in extreme detail with worksheets and checklists and journal prompts and everything in our course that is called Shiro. Shiro is your WILD guide to warrior after abuse. And that is a 36 lesson, 6 module kind of course. And about 12 weeks it takes if you're like right on top of it. But it's self-paced. So if you want to take a year to get through it because you just need to chew on little bits at a time, that's perfectly fine too. So that's one of the courses that we have available. And it's a prerequisite for our coach training course for those who feel like, hey, I'm ready to enter into Shiro warrior status. I want to turn around and help others. And I want the training to do that. So that's the second layer after that. But Shiro is our flagship course that is for healing and recovery and empowerment and mindset shift. And in that, we have the 4 pillars of recovery. And those are the 4 letters of WILD. So when we are first coming out of abuse, the big question is, how do I make wise choices? Because when you've been gaslit, when you've been self-doubting, when you've been made to feel crazy, when you've been told you're stupid, when you've had other people taking their entitlement to control and coercion over you, when you have lived in compliance, you end up sacrificing part of your personhood. Mm-hmm. And so coming out of that can be super scary because it's like, okay, well, how do I make all these decisions by myself? I haven't been allowed to make these decisions, or I've had to fight to make these decisions. Now I am held responsible for any decisions I make. It's kind of horrifying. And so learning how to embrace wisdom, and that's the W in WILD. How do I make wise choices? And we have a whole structure for ways to make wise choices. The second letter is I in WILD, and that stands for identity. Because a lot of times when we're coming out of survivor mode, we've just got to make decisions. We don't have time to figure out who I am and to sit and introspect and reflect and, genuflect, whatever. We don't have time to navel gaze. We got to get a job. We got to get a house. We got to take care of our kids. We got to figure this stuff out. We got to not put anybody in the hospital. I don't have time to figure out who I am. I got to make choices. I got to make decisions and take action. So that's why we start with the wisdom first. Then when that gets out of safety, survival, into stability, in the mode of stability, which is the second season of healing, we get to ask, who am I? And this is kind of when we've been safe for a little while, we start to get stable and then we fall apart. Because it's like, oh my goodness, I need to figure out who I am. I don't even know who I am. Did you ever see Runaway Bride? Mm-hmm. Julia Roberts? I'm dating myself here.
The eggs.
The eggs. Yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't even know how I like my eggs. Mm-hmm. I need to sit down at the bar at this restaurant, at the diner, and ask them to make eggs 28 ways. And I'm going to take a bite of every single one of them so that I can figure out how I like my eggs. Because I've always just been compliant. So that comes after your safety and your wisdom. You get those things all lined up. So identity, but it goes a layer deeper. And that is, it's not just who am I? Because if we only ask that question, then we tend to define who am I based on the lies everyone else has told us. You're stupid, you're fat, you're not enough, you're too lazy, you're not hardworking, you can't figure that out, you're a terrible mom, you don't do this, you don't do that, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you talk too much, you're 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 not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're too much, you're too much. This confusing messages. So in that, we have to ask, who does God say that I am? And that's where we go to the root of our identity. What does God say about me? Where is my value in the eyes of my Father? A loving Father, not an abusive one. And that leads us to the season of strength. So we have safety, stability, strength. And then, and that's wisdom, identity, and legacy. Legacy, though, this is a looking back kind of legacy, not like what legacy will I leave? Because we're not there yet. This is, what legacy have I inherited? What baggage am I carrying from my history and from the generations of history past that may have given me coping skills, survival skills that kept me alive in that, but now they are not serving me well in health. Right. What do I need to let go of in order to parse out and untangle all this baggage, these suitcases I'm carrying. It's like, I have 47 suitcases, but they're cute and they match, right? No, you don't need to be carrying 47 suitcases. You need like the one suitcase that has the stuff that really matters. So we have to go through the assessment, the inventory. What do I need to let go of? What is dragging me down? What is somebody else's suitcase? It doesn't even have my name tag on it, but I'm here carrying it. And that requires safety, stability, and strength. You can only do that process from a place of strength. Then we have the fourth stage. So we have wisdom, identity, legacy, and daring. Daring is where we begin looking forward. Where do I go from here? I have walked out of the wilderness and the fog, and now I want to move into the wild adventure, the wild fierceness, the wild love. I don't mean untamed. I mean uncontrollable by humans, uncompliant, not unkind,
right,
but strong in your personhood and your identity because you have a clear grasp on who God says you are. You know how to make wise decisions. You know who God says you are. You've combed through your legacy and jettisoned, drop kicked off the top of a cliff, all the stuff that was not luggage that you needed to carry. And now you're ready to be forward facing, looking into the future and daring to move into the wild. And that is the season of Shiro. Safety, stability, strength, and Shiro. Because now you're like, how can I take the hell that I have been through and find purpose and use it for good? How can God bring purpose out of my pain? Now I'm ready to move forward with daring.
That's so good. And you can do it in a very dignified way as well, right?
Absolutely.
You don't have to go in and slay everything. You really can do it.
I mean, there are times when it's appropriate to slay some dragons. I'm not going to lie.
That's true. That's true.
Look at this. Do you remember the story of Jael in Judges? Old Testament?
I don't know that I do.
It was either the Amalekites or the Amorites or the Moabites. One of the Israel, one of the ites. And they were at war with Israel. And there was this woman who was in her nomad's tent. And Captain Sisera, he was the leader of the enemy army. He came in and asked her to shelter him. She's like, okay, come on in. And he's exhausted from fleeing and fighting for days. And he falls asleep. She gives him warm milk, legit, says it in the Bible. She gives him a bowl of milk or whatever it is, and he falls asleep. She takes tent pegs and drives it through his head and won the war. And later, the prophetess Deborah, it's Judges 5, I think, she sings a song and she says, most blessed in all of Israel are the hands of Jael, who delivered us from our enemy. Now, I am not advocating for assassination or murder. I'm talking about the importance of having the strength to do hard things and to stand up against evil. One of our merchandise things that helps us provide free material for survivors who can't afford resources is stuff like this. We have this journal, and it's ladylike jail, tent pegs in his head, man. So in a symbolic way, do not think I'm advocating for violence here, but every now and then Jesus flipped some tables.
That's right.
And we can do that in that classy way, but still be standing up very strongly for what is right.
Right. And I think just that reminder, I love that story. I'm going to go back and read that. I don't remember Jael. So I remember Esther and Deborah and all the other, Ruth and, all those, but I was like, how did that, anyway, I'll go back and read that. But I just think that reminder, as so many people kind of try to play in that devil's advocate, well, like God hates divorce, or God hates, just remember, like, there's nothing more important to the heart of our Father than the sanctity of a life. It's more important than marriage. It's more important than anything in the world. And so I love that story. I love just, everything about what you're doing. I love Wild. I love all the, I mean, just, if you are a woman, and we know that it takes many more times, and is a statistic, it takes sometimes 7 times for a woman to actually leave.
7 times, yeah.
Okay. So whatever time this is, I just want women that are suffering in silence. Many times we know this is silence, to know that there is help, there is hope, there is healing, there is stability and security, and there are places out there, even online. I love how you said that you all are doing an app, that women can get to help immediately, and it may not be their church. I even love how you said, check out some local support services out there to go on and get that. There's private Facebook communities. There's so many things now than there was even 5-10 years ago.
And so even 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay. But get that support so that, if you do go to your local church, or if you do go to your clergy, whatever that looks like, and that is maybe a message counter to the support that you are getting locally, get that local support and get the help that you need. Is there any closing things that you want to share to a woman that might be listening?
For those who are listening, I would just want to say that the heart of God is for your safety. And there are many ways to achieve safety. None of them come from compliance with evil. Does that mean that you have to divorce your husband? No. Does that mean that you have to leave your husband? No. It does mean that you have the right to live without fear. And you have the right before God to take steps to discover what that could look like for you in your dynamic and your situation. When you are seeking to love your abuser well, the best way to do that is to no longer allow them to sin against you with impunity, but to hold a high standard that says, I am a daughter of God. And God says he wants me to be safe, and that he wants me to live without fear and without fog. And I will do whatever I need to do to be living that way as his daughter, and see where that leads you, one step at a time.
That's so good. That's so good. We're going to end on that, as well as you pointing everybody to your resources. I'll put all the links in our show notes.
Great.
How can people get in touch with you and your organization?
All right. Well, the one-stop shop for literally everything is www.wilderness2wild, 3 words altogether.com. If you go to wilderness2wild.store, that's where we have all the goodies, all of the courses, books, free resources, giveaways, wellness things, training materials, everything, coaching. All of those links are on wilderness2wild.com, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. It's all there. You can get to all of those. And we're active on all of those other social platforms too. So if you are looking for interaction on a social platform like Facebook, I'm on Facebook too much, way too much. And we have a large community there. But you can also access our safe healing private communities and niche peer support groups from the website. We have the groups right there. You can scroll down and there's a link for the entry form, because we do require you to answer the questions for every entry form, because it's part of how we keep people safe.
Yeah.
So all of those are all there on the website.
And earlier, Sarah, you mentioned something about Psalm 82 Initiative.
Yes, I love Psalm 82 Initiative. And so if you go to psalm82initiative.org or Psalm 82 Initiative on Facebook, they're active very much in both places.
Okay. And they have like a course or something like that, you said?
They have a course on the 4 tools, and it's extremely comprehensive. It's a deep dive into what I gave you, just like the little overview of today. So that's available there. And, Melody, I can give you a special link directly to that course for the show notes as well.
That's awesome.
I'll do that.
That is awesome. Well, I not only love what you do, but I've heard a little bit about what y'all are continuing to do and all the things. So if you are listening, you definitely need to go to Wilderness to Wild and go on and subscribe so that you can get their newsletter and all the things because they're, and here's the thing, if you're a ministry leader out there, or even if you're a woman that's not going through abuse, you either, I always say you're one of three people. You either may be going through abuse, you may know a friend that may be going through abuse, or you might have somebody in your congregation that will one day be going through this. So just to get the information and the knowledge and the tools to have access to point people to, I think is so, so important.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Thank you so much for your time, Melody.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been rich, and I cannot wait to get it out into the world so that everybody can hear and point back to your organization.
Thank you so much.